They stole my husband, then they tried to steal my future. But they forgot one crucial detail. I always read the fine print. The smell of stale coffee and desperation clung to my apartment like cheap perfume. For 20 years, that apartment, with its sun-faded floral wallpaper and the lingering scent of my husband Mark's aftershave, had been our sanctuary. Or so I thought. Now, it was just my space, hollowed out, echoing with the ghost of a life I'd carefully constructed, brick by painstaking brick. I remember the day he told me. It wasn't dramatic. No throne plates, no shouted accusations. Just Mark, sitting across the Formica kitchen table, picking at a hangnail, looking everywhere but at me. "Ilara," he'd begun, his voice unnervingly mild, like he was discussing the weather, "I need to be honest with you. I've met someone." The someone was Chloe. Chloe, who was 27, worked in digital marketing and had the kind of boundless, terrifying energy that made my 45 years suddenly feel like ancient history. Mark, a senior partner at a mid-sized architecture firm, claimed Chloe understood his vision in a way I hadn't in years. He packed his monogrammed leather suitcase 3 days later, leaving behind the mortgage, the dog, and the suffocating silence that had replaced our easy companionship. The ensuing months were a blur of lawyer appointments, therapy sessions that only made me angrier, and the agonizing process of untangling 2 decades of shared finances. Mark was ruthless, insisting on splitting everything down the middle, citing his contribution to my small inherited investment portfolio. I let him have it, frankly. I just wanted him gone. I wanted the pain to stop. I signed the papers he slid across the table, papers detailing the dissolution of our shared assets, the division of the house, the mutual release of future claims. I signed them with a trembling hand, feeling like I was signing away my own history. I retreated into my own world. I focused on my small, long-neglected freelance editing business, pouring hours into other people's narratives because I couldn't face writing my own next chapter. Mark and Chloe, meanwhile, were living loudly. They bought a modern glass and steel monstrosity overlooking the harbor, the kind of house Mark always said was too flashy when we were together. I saw pictures on social media, glowing smiles, exotic vacations, Chloe wearing the sapphire necklace I'd given Mark for his 50th birthday. It was torture, but I couldn't look away. Then came the inevitable financial entanglement. Mark, ever the ambitious visionary, wasn't content with just his salary. He was pouring his capital and likely a significant chunk of my settled assets into Chloe's new venture, an artisanal coffee and sustainable lifestyle boutique she named The Willow and Root. It sounded painfully trendy, and I braced myself for the inevitable public failure. I kept tabs quietly, mostly out of morbid curiosity, watching as they struggled to secure seed funding. Local banks were hesitant. Mark's reputation, while solid, wasn't enough for a high-risk startup in a saturated market. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I needed to refinance my half of the house, a simple administrative task. I called my longtime attorney, Mr. Henderson, who specialized in complex property law. He sounded distracted when I called him back later that afternoon. "Ilara, I have the closing documents for the refinancing here, ready for your review." But while I was cross-referencing the recent property valuation for collateral purposes, a small administrative query popped up regarding your previous settlement agreement with Mark. I sighed, expecting another tedious detail about mineral rights or boundary lines. "What is it, Mr. Henderson? Did he undervalue the antique piano again?" No. It pertains to the mutual release clause in your final divorce decree, specifically the one concerning any future liabilities or endorsements. Henderson paused, the sound of shuffling paper loud over the phone line. I was running a routine check on Mark's recent financial activities, just standard due diligence for your upcoming loan application. You understand. And I found something rather unusual tied to Chloe's new business, the Willow and Root. My stomach tightened, a cold, unwelcome knot forming in my core. Unusual how? Did he lend her money without telling me? I swear, if he tried to... It's not a loan from him, Alara. It appears Chloe secured a substantial line of credit, nearly $500,000, from the First Harbor Business Fund 3 weeks ago. The initial paperwork indicated Mark was acting as the primary guarantor, which we already knew about. His voice dropped, becoming lower, more serious. However, the final executed agreement, the one that actually unlocked the funds, lists a secondary significant guarantor, someone with substantial liquid assets and an impeccable credit history who signed on just before the final transfer. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. And who is this secondary guarantor, Mr. Henderson? Don't drag this out. There was another, longer silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his experienced legal mind. It's you, Alara. According to the documents filed yesterday, there's a signed personal guarantee attached to Chloe's business loan, effectively making you liable for the full $500,000 if she defaults. The signature, Alara, it's undeniably yours. The line went dead quiet, save for the frantic buzzing in my own ears. My signature. Me signing away $500,000 for the woman who stole my husband and my future. The absurdity of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. That's impossible, I managed to whisper, the words grating in my dry throat. I didn't sign anything. I signed the divorce papers. That's it. Mr. Henderson, you handled every financial document pertaining to the settlement. You know I wouldn't touch Mark's or Chloe's business ventures with a 10-foot pole. I know that, Alara. Believe me, I'm reviewing the stack of paperwork you authorized me to sign right now. The divorce decree, the asset division, all clean. But this loan agreement, it's entirely separate, dated 6 weeks after the decree was finalized, and it requires a personal surety signature from someone with a substantial existing credit line. So what are you saying? That I somehow walked into a bank, authorized by myself, and signed away collateral on a business I despise? My voice was rising, edged with hysteria. Did Mark forge it? Did he... Forging is rarely necessary when you have access to original documents, Henderson cut in sharply. Alara, the signature is legitimate. It matches the samples we have on file from your tax returns and the refinancing paperwork you just authorized me to process. It's not a forgery, it's authentic, but you have no recollection of signing it. That was the terrifying truth. I had no recollection. The period immediately following the divorce had been a fog of stress hormones and sleepless nights. I'd been signing things constantly: insurance forms, utility transfers, bank declarations. My brain, overloaded with grief, had become a sieve. "Find out how it happened," I commanded, my panic hardening into ice-cold resolve. "I want to know who presented this document to me, where I signed it, and what trick they used. This is fraud, Mr. Henderson. Elaborate, malicious fraud. I'm on it. I've already instructed my paralegal to subpoena the loan file from First Harbor Business Fund. We should have copies of the signature affidavit by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, Alara, I need you to understand the gravity of this. If Chloe defaults and artisanal coffee shops have a volatile success rate, That $500,000 debt rolls straight onto your personal assets. Your house, your savings, everything you kept separate during the divorce is now collateral. I spent the rest of the evening meticulously retracing my steps. I searched my memory for any meeting, any encounter with Mark or Chloe that could have involved a stack of papers. Nothing. They had maintained a strict, calculated distance, communicating only through their lawyers. Mark wanted me gone, not entangled. Or did he? The next day was agonizingly slow. I couldn't focus on editing. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, expecting the lawyer's call confirming the worst. Finally, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, accusing shadows across my living room, Mr. Henderson called back. "Alara, I have the documents. It was a very slick operation. The bank required 2 separate signing events. The first was the primary guarantee from Mark. The second, yours, was handled off-site at a notary service downtown. The notary report confirms you appeared in person, alone, on October 14th. October 14th. I remembered that day vaguely. I'd driven downtown to the old courthouse library to access some obscure historical texts for an editing client, a tedious, solitary research trip. "What does the notary report say?" I demanded, leaning against the kitchen counter, suddenly afraid to sit down. "It says you identified yourself, affirmed you understood the document's purpose, and signed under oath. Standard procedure." But here's the crux of the matter, Alara. When I cross-referenced the document itself with your divorce settlement documentation, the papers you signed back in July, he paused again, and this time the silence felt heavy with unspoken accusation. The loan guarantee document wasn't actually a new agreement that needed your signature. It was a rider, an amendment to the original property settlement. My blood ran cold. A rider to what? To the final dissolution paperwork, Alara. The document you signed in July releasing all future claims. Except this rider, this one making you liable for Chloe's business, was intentionally obscured. It was digitally bound into the very last page of the main settlement agreement, page 57, tucked between the final signature block and the boilerplate text. It was formatted to look like an appendix reference number, not a legally binding contract amendment. I sank onto the floor, the phone slipping slightly in my numb hand. "You're saying, when I signed the final divorce papers, I signed away my security without even knowing it?" "Precisely. And here is the kicker, Alara. The document clearly states that you initiated this secondary guarantee. It says you requested the addition of your name as a collateral surety for Chloe's venture, citing your belief in the business model and your desire to provide a soft landing cushion for Mark should his initial guarantee prove insufficient. The paper trail indicates you asked for this addition yourself." I stared at the wall, seeing nothing but the phantom image of Mark's smug face. This wasn't just fraud, it was a psychological dismantling. He hadn't forged my signature. He had manipulated me into signing the trap in the first place, exploiting my exhaustion and grief during the divorce signing. But the new information, the October 14th signing, that didn't fit the pattern of the initial deception. "Mr. Henderson," I breathed, my voice a strained thread. "The October 14th notary appointment. Who was present at the notary besides me?" "Just the notary, Alara, but when I checked the file submission records, the digital copy sent to the bank after your notarized signature was obtained, there was an accompanying cover sheet detailing instructions for securing the finalized loan. And," I urged, leaning forward, suddenly alert despite the crushing weight of the revelation. The instructions were written on firm letterhead, Alara, not Mark's architecture firm. It was the letterhead of a small, fledgling consulting agency called Visionary Pathfinders, LLC. And the authorizing signature on that submission sheet, the one that instructed the bank to process your secondary guarantee, was Chloe's. I felt a dizzying shift in perspective. Mark had set the initial trap during the divorce signing, hiding the rider in July. But the final enforcement, the one that solidified the bank's ability to come after me if Chloe failed, was executed in October, initiated by Chloe herself after she had clearly secured Mark's primary guarantee. They weren't just covering their bases. They were building a fortress where I was the accidental, unwitting foundation. Wait, I said, my mind racing, connecting two disparate pieces of information. Visionary Pathfinders, LLC. I think I saw that name somewhere before. Didn't Mark mention that name when he was explaining Chloe's initial business structure months ago? He said it was their branding consultant? It was, Alara. But I need you to brace yourself for what I found when I looked up the registration for Visionary Pathfinders, LLC. They incorporated 3 weeks before your divorce was finalized, and the sole registered owner of Visionary Pathfinders, LLC, the entity that submitted your secondary guarantee signature to the bank, is Mark. I stood up, needing movement, needing to pace the small confines of my kitchen. Mark was playing a deeper game than mere revenge or simple greed. He had set up a shell company, used it to submit the final, legally binding documents that ensnared me, all while pretending he had nothing to do with the final agreement that was now threatening my solvency. So, Mark registered a company using the name he casually mentioned to me, used that company to submit the paperwork that finalized the trap he laid during the divorce, and Chloe signed off on the final instruction to the bank? They coordinated this? It looks that way, Alara. A perfectly layered deception. But there's one final detail about that October 14th notary appointment that concerns me deeply, Alara. You stated you were at the library that day, correct? Researching texts? Yes, for an editing project for an old college acquaintance, Dr. Davies. He needed obscure references on medieval trade routes. Well, I looked up Dr. Davies' current location. He's on sabbatical in Kyoto. He hasn't been on campus in 9 months. And the address you gave me for the meeting location on October 14th. It wasn't the public notary office downtown. It was a private office suite, the one directly above the Willow and Root Boutique. My breath hitched. I hadn't gone to the library. I'd gone somewhere they directed me, somewhere they controlled. They had fabricated the research trip, used my commitment to work against me, and ensured I signed the enforcement document in a controlled environment, not realizing I was walking directly into Chloe's new office building. They set me up, Mr. Henderson. They lured me there under false pretenses. They did, he confirmed grimly. And now, Alara, we need to find out why. Because while Mark's initial involvement in the fraud is clear, the final instruction sheet submitted on October 14th contains an odd, handwritten addendum, scrawled in the margin of Chloe's signature block, just before the bank processed the loan. What does it say? I whispered, dreading the answer, sensing this was the last cruel twist. It says, if Alara defaults, we liquidate assets immediately, except for the original annuity. That stays untouched, as per our agreement. See Appendix D. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. If Alara defaults, we liquidate assets immediately, except for the original annuity. That stays untouched, as per our agreement. See Appendix D. My mind scrambled, desperately trying to place Appendix D. In all the mountains of settlement paperwork, the only thing designated as an annuity was the small, untouchable retirement fund I had inherited from my grandmother, a fund Mark had fought tooth and nail to exclude from the divorce settlement, citing its separate provenance. He'd respected that boundary, or so I believed. Appendix D doesn't exist in the divorce decree, I stated flatly, my voice devoid of emotion, the shock finally giving way to a terrifying clarity. We finalized everything based on the exhibits attached to the master agreement. There was no Appendix D. What agreement is that referring to? That's the critical question, Ilara. It implies a secondary, completely separate contractual agreement between you and Mark, one that predates or perhaps even supersedes parts of the divorce settlement regarding that specific asset. Mark wouldn't have needed an addendum to protect the annuity if it was legally separate, unless he was planning to seize it all along. The thought that Mark had spent the entire year after leaving me not just securing revenge, but methodically dismantling my final financial safety net made my hands tremble again. Chloe was the bait, the shiny distraction. Mark was the architect, ensuring that if his ex-wife fell, she'd fall hard enough to break. We need that full loan file today, Mr. Henderson. Every page. I need to see this handwriting, and I need to know precisely what they consider liquidatable assets under this fraudulent secondary guarantee. Henderson was swift. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in his sterile conference room, 2 inches of dense paper stacked before me, the complete file for the Willow and Roots $500,000 loan. The October 14th rider was even more damning in print. The handwritten note was clearly Chloe's looping, overconfident script, a stark contrast to the rigid type of the document itself. But it was the definition of liquidatable assets in the attached schedule, Schedule C, not Appendix D, that made me gasp. It listed the primary collateral as Mark's investment properties, Chloe's boutique inventory, and then, chillingly, Ilara Vance's residential property equity, subject to the terms outlined in the Vance Personal Guarantee Addendum. Appendix D. "This is insane," I choked out. "They tied my house equity directly to the terms of an agreement I've never seen. Where is Appendix D?" Henderson pointed to a single folded sheet of high-quality cream paper, tucked deep inside the file, almost glued to the back cover. It was signed by both Mark and me, dated 2 years before the divorce, back when we were renovating the kitchen. "This, Ilara," Henderson said slowly, tapping the document, "is the Appendix D. It's a prenuptial amendment, effectively. You signed this when you took out the initial joint mortgage on this house to protect Mark's inheritance from being fully exposed in a future default scenario concerning his business liabilities." My eyes scanned the cramped script. It detailed how, in the event of a joint default on any significant debt incurred by Mark's architecture firm, my equity in the primary residence would be frozen until the debt was settled, unless the debt was explicitly tied to his separate, grandmother-inherited annuity, which was protected. "But this loan isn't for his architecture firm, it's for Chloe's coffee shop," I protested. "Correct," Henderson agreed, leaning closer. "But look at the wording in the opening paragraph, Ilara. It states that the protective clause regarding the annuity applies to any debt incurred by Mark or by any entity in which he holds a financial interest greater than 40%. When Mark invested his capital into the Willow and Root, he instantly triggered this 2-year-old agreement. It was a perfect multi-layered trap sprung by time and complacency. Mark had set the conditions for my financial exposure years ago, and he and Chloe had exploited the mechanism the moment he invested in her future. "And Chloe knew this?" I asked. the rage returning, sharper now that I understood the mechanics. She must have. She structured the loan to trigger the guarantee, knowing Mark's pre-existing liability clause would pull you in. The only way they could ensure they got the $500,000 quickly, without extensive bank scrutiny of Mark's current solvency, was by having a secondary, clean guarantor, you, whose assets were already flagged by Appendix D. I looked down at the signature on the October 14th rider, the one I thought I'd made weeks after the divorce was final, proving I was fully aware of the risk. Then I looked at the July signature page where the fraudulent rider had been hidden. So, what happens now? Chloe's shop is doing reasonably well, but the margins on artisanal coffee are brutal. If they default, I lose my house because of a document I signed years ago, manipulated during the divorce, and then supposedly reaffirmed months later. Not quite. They haven't defaulted. Yet. But the language about the annuity, that's the key. They are betting on you not knowing the full extent of your liability under Appendix D, so you won't challenge the loan, which keeps your house equity tied up as collateral. Henderson paused, his expression grim. However, Chloe's company has missed its last 2 inventory payments to their supplier. They are running on fumes, Alara. We have maybe 4 weeks before they're officially in breach of contract, and the bank calls the note. 4 weeks until the vultures circled my home. I had to fight back, not just against the loan, but against the entire structure of deceit. I need to see the original October 14th document that Chloe submitted to the notary, I said, picking up the file, feeling the weight of my entire future in my hands. I need to know exactly what I was looking at that day, who was in the room with me when I supposedly signed that rider affirming my knowledge of Appendix D. Henderson frowned, pulling out the notary affidavit again. Alara, the affidavit states you were alone when you presented the document for notarization. However, when I checked the security camera footage requested from the building management for that afternoon, there was a brief 30-second lapse in recording directly outside the notary's suite door. A lapse? Yes. And the technician noted that just before the recording resumed, a figure was seen walking away from the vicinity of the notary office, carrying a large rolled-up document tube, heading towards the elevator that goes directly to the Willow and Root. Henderson leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. We enhanced the grainy footage from the hallway camera leading to the main stairwell, Alara. The person walking away with the rolled-up document, the one who facilitated your signature, wasn't Mark. It was Chloe. And she wasn't just walking away from the notary. She was walking directly toward the back entrance of her shop, carrying what looked suspiciously like the original initial loan agreement document right before it was sent to the bank for final processing. I felt a chilling dread settle over me. Chloe hadn't just orchestrated the final signature. She had been physically present at the scene of the deception, ensuring I signed the wrong thing while thinking I was performing a mundane task for my ex-husband's work. If Chloe was there, then she was the one who tricked me into signing that rider, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed fury. If she was there, she committed notary fraud. That invalidates the entire guarantee. It might, Henderson agreed, pushing his glasses up his nose. But here's the twist that could send this entire thing crashing down on us. We tracked the address of the notary service Chloe used that day. It wasn't just any notary. It was a registered agent service that specializes in handling legal filings for Mark's primary business competitor, Sterling and Associates. They are currently engaged in a hostile takeover bid of Mark's firm. I stared at the file, the implications slamming into me with the force of a physical blow. Mark and Chloe hadn't just committed fraud against me. They had potentially used me as leverage in a much larger corporate war, a war I didn't even know was being fought. And if the loan defaulted, if I was ruined, Mark's firm would be weakened, making the takeover by Sterling and Associates inevitable. "We have to go to the authorities, Mr. Henderson. This is beyond civil litigation." Henderson nodded slowly. "I agree. But before we file the complaint, I needed to confirm one last detail. The police will need incontrovertible proof of intent. I had my paralegal run a deep dive on Chloe's company filings, looking for anything that connects Visionary Pathfinders, LLC, to Sterling and Associates." He slid one final thin printout across the desk. It was a document filed with the Secretary of State, dated exactly 1 day after I supposedly signed the Appendix D rider in October. "This filing," Henderson said, his voice barely audible, "formally registers a new corporate structure for the Willow and Root. It dissolves Visionary Pathfinders, LLC, and transfers all its existing liabilities and, more importantly, all its founding documentation to a new entity, an entity registered under the name Sterling and Associates Acquisitions Division." I looked at the paper, my vision blurring. Chloe's coffee shop wasn't just a vanity project, it was a Trojan horse. Mark had been investing his money into a business that, upon failure, was designed to be immediately absorbed by his biggest rival, effectively bankrupting him and seizing his assets simultaneously. And I was the one holding the liability trigger. "But why would Mark help them bankrupt himself?" I whispered, confused by the complexity of the betrayal. Why would he let his life's work be taken over? Henderson leaned back, his face etched with grim understanding. Because he wasn't protecting his business, Alara. He was protecting his exit strategy. Look at the date of this transfer again. It happened the day after you signed the secondary guarantee. He handed Sterling the keys, knowing they would use the inevitable default on Chloe's loan, a default guaranteed by you, to justify seizing everything he legally owned. He paused, then delivered the final crushing piece of information. "But there's one small detail missing from that transfer document, Alara, something that Sterling and Associates didn't acquire in the takeover, something Chloe explicitly held back in that final transfer filing, something she listed as personal asset non-transferable, citing the Vance annuity agreement." I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs, understanding dawning with sickening speed. Chloe hadn't protected the annuity for Mark. She had protected it for herself. She used me to ruin Mark, destroy his company through his own existing liability clauses, and seize his assets for Sterling, all while ensuring the only thing she couldn't touch, the one asset Mark fought hardest to keep safe, was the annuity he left me in the first place. But if she was holding back the annuity, why would she need my signature on the loan guarantee at all? Henderson didn't hesitate. Because the loan was never about the money, Alara. It was about the timing. The loan needed to default now, while the takeover was in progress, and the primary guarantor, Mark, couldn't be the one initiating the default. He tapped the final document one last time. The transfer to Sterling and Associates was contingent on the prompt liquidation of Mark's primary assets upon loan default. But the penalty clause for your secondary guarantee, the one you signed believing you were protecting Mark, was different. If you defaulted, Alara, your penalty wasn't just the house equity. The secondary clause stated that upon your default, Mark Vance would be legally compelled to immediately forfeit all remaining claims to the grandmother's annuity, the one asset Sterling couldn't acquire, directly to Chloe as a fulfillment bonus for her successful execution of the takeover strategy. I sat frozen, comprehending the full, staggering scope of the manipulation. I wasn't the victim of a stray ex-husband. I was the meticulously placed domino designed to fall in a specific way at a specific time, not to lose my house, but to gift Chloe the very asset Mark had sworn to protect for me. Chloe set me up to fail, I whispered. She needed me to sign that rider, not to secure her loan, but to trigger a mechanism that would force Mark to hand over my inheritance to her when I inevitably defaulted. Exactly. Which means you need to force a default before Chloe does. But there's one more terrifying thing we found during the document sweep, Ilara. The reason Chloe needed the loan to default within the next 4 weeks is because that's when the statute of limitations expires on the original Appendix D. If the loan isn't called due before then, Appendix D becomes legally unenforceable, and Mark's assets, and your house, become untouchable. I looked at the calendar. 4 weeks. Mr. Henderson, we need to challenge the validity of that October 14th signing immediately. We need to prove Chloe was there, manipulating me. We will, but you need to understand the stakes. If we fail to invalidate that secondary guarantee before the statute of limitations runs out, Chloe wins everything. She gets Mark's assets through Sterling, and she gets the annuity from you. The only way to stop her now is to act so decisively that she is forced to expose her involvement in the notary fraud before the 4-week deadline. I stood up, suddenly feeling lighter, powered by sheer adrenaline and fury. Then let's give her a target. If she needs a default, we'll give her one. Call the bank, Mr. Henderson. Tell them I want to initiate a preemptive challenge to the collateral valuation on the loan. Tell them I suspect serious financial misrepresentation on the part of the Willow and Root. Tell them I'm demanding an immediate full audit of their receivables and inventory. Henderson looked aghast. Ilara, that will put immense pressure on the business. If Chloe feels cornered, she'll default immediately, and we'll be back to square one, facing the full weight of Appendix D. No, I said, my voice hard as granite. If I call for an audit, it forces Chloe's hand now. She won't wait for the statute of limitations to expire if she thinks the bank is about to uncover the underlying fraud. I stared at the telephone, imagining the phone call initiating the legal earthquake. It was a desperate gamble, pushing the pawn into the center of the board when the king was exposed. Do it, Mr. Henderson, today. And once that audit request is officially filed, call Mark's lawyer. Tell him that I know about Appendix D, I know about the Sterling takeover, and I know that Chloe was the one facilitating the notary appointment on October 14th. Henderson swallowed hard. And what do you expect Mark to do, Ilara? I expect him to realize that the only person who loses absolutely everything, including the annuity Chloe promised him, is him if Chloe successfully frames him for the fraud that ruins me. I leaned over the table, my eyes burning with intensity. I need him to choose his side, Mr. Henderson. I need him to choose between the woman who set him up for ruin and the wife he thought he'd already destroyed. Henderson picked up the phone, dialing the number for his paralegal. As he began giving instructions, I looked down at the final document, the one outlining the penalty for my default. The line about Chloe receiving the annuity still burned in my mind. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text message, entirely unlisted, an unknown number. The message was brief, a single sentence containing no greeting, no signature. Ilara, stop the audit. I know what you're planning. If you move against Chloe before the deadline, I will publicly release every single text message exchange you and I had during the last 6 months of our marriage, felt blinding, including the detailed instructions you sent me on how to hide funds from the IRS in 2018. Mark hadn't just threatened to ruin my reputation. I'll make sure you can never work again. He threatened to destroy my career, the very livelihood I had clawed back from the wreckage of our marriage. Tax evasion, a charge I'd been foolish enough to joke about in text messages during a period of intense financial stress years ago. An incident I thought had been completely purged from his digital memory. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, who was already hanging up the phone, confusion etched on his face. "What is it, Alara? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I managed, shoving the phone across the table. "A ghost with my own passwords. Mark just sent me a message. He's holding evidence of tax fraud over my head if I proceed with challenging the loan audit." Henderson read the text, his composure finally cracking. "He can't be serious. This changes everything. If we file the challenge, he counters with this, and you're facing criminal investigation alongside insolvency. This isn't about Chloe anymore. This is a coordinated attack orchestrated by Mark to force compliance until the statute of limitations expires." The realization hit me like a physical shove. Mark wasn't being played by Chloe. He was collaborating with her, using her business as the vehicle to achieve his ultimate goal, to silence me and then take the annuity when the dust settled, perhaps believing Chloe would be indebted to him for steering the final collapse. "We can't stop the audit request now," I said, grabbing my keys. The sheer audacity of the threat fueled a cold, dangerous clarity. If I backed down now, he won, and I'd lose everything: my home, my career, and finally, my grandmother's legacy. If we stop, we lose everything by default in 4 weeks. If we proceed, we force the issue now. We expose the fraud, and we use Mark's reaction as proof of collusion. Alara, that's incredibly risky. If Sterling and Associates gets wind that Mark is actively sabotaging the loan repayment process, even if it's to protect himself, they will move faster than the bank. They could seize his assets before we even get a court injunction. "Let them," I said, standing up. "Mark is playing a game of high-stakes chicken with his rivals, and I'm the collateral damage. But if I go down, I'm taking him with me, and I'm taking Chloe down for the notary fraud. I need you to immediately file the challenge against the loan valuation, and then I need you to pull every document pertaining to Mark's partnership agreements with Sterling and Associates." "Why Sterling?" Henderson asked, scrambling to catch up. "The fraud is between you, Mark, and Chloe. Because Mark is using Sterling to take over his own firm, and Chloe is the delivery mechanism. If I can prove Mark was communicating with Sterling before October 14th about utilizing the default clause in Appendix D, it proves the whole scenario was premeditated, making the tax threat a desperate last-ditch effort to control me." I left Henderson's office feeling exposed, walking into the brutal afternoon sun. I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't rely solely on lawyers who were working reactively. I needed information that existed outside the legal subpoenas. I drove directly to the harbor, parking blocks away from the shining, glass-fronted monolith that was Chloe's boutique, the Willow and Root. It was 4 p.m., prime time for pretentious afternoon purchases. I watched the door through my polarized sunglasses. Mark wasn't there. He rarely visited during business hours, preferring to manage things remotely. Chloe emerged half an hour later, laughing into her phone, draped in an expensive-looking silk shawl carrying a small, personalized delivery box. She looked impossibly vibrant, the picture of effortless success funded by my potential ruin. I waited until she was fumbling with her car keys, a sleek, new German model that undoubtedly eclipsed the sedan Mark had left me. I walked toward her, slowly at first, ensuring I had her full attention before I spoke. "Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She flinched violently, dropping her car keys onto the pavement. She didn't look beautiful now. She looked startled and utterly ruthless. "Ilara, what are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I'm here because I know about Appendix D, Chloe. I know you used the notary fraud to ensure the loan defaulted right before the statute of limitations runs out, so you could claim the annuity as your bonus for ruining Mark." Chloe blinked once, regaining her composure with terrifying speed. She bent down, smoothly retrieving her keys, not bothering to look at me. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're delusional, Ilara. That loan is solid. And frankly, you should worry less about my business and more about your own financial mismanagement being exposed." "Oh, I'm not worried about my mismanagement," I countered, taking another step closer. "I'm worried about Mark's mismanagement, the kind that involves illegal side deals with Sterling and Associates." At the mention of Sterling, the facade finally cracked. Her eyes widened, and a flicker of genuine panic crossed her face before she masked it with contempt. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, Ilara. You should be grateful Mark left you enough to survive on." "I'm grateful for nothing, Chloe, but you made one mistake in your careful planning. You thought Mark was your partner in this. You thought he was happy to see his old firm burn down so Sterling could take over and he could walk away clean with you." I paused, leaning in conspiratorially, letting the full weight of my next statement land. But Mark didn't just set up the original debt structure to hurt me. He set it up so that if the loan defaulted, Sterling and Associates wouldn't just acquire his firm, they would acquire him. Mark isn't getting a severance package, Chloe. He's getting a seat on the board of the acquiring company, but he's going to be under a non-compete clause so restrictive he'll never work in this city again. Chloe stared at me, her breathing shallow. "That's a lie. He told me he was setting himself up for early retirement." "Did he tell you that after he signed the transfer agreement with Sterling? Did he tell you that after he signed the text message threat to me? He's using you to burn everything down, Chloe, including himself, just to make sure I'm ruined in the process. But you're just his tool, and once you secure the annuity, he's disposable." I saw the doubt bloom in her eyes. Mark's ambition was legendary, but so was his capacity for self-sabotage if he felt slighted. "You're trying to sow discord," Chloe hissed, but the conviction was gone. "Am I? Check your phone, Chloe. Mark just sent me a text threatening to expose my past tax issues. Why would he do that if he wasn't desperate to stop my audit? Because if I audit the Willow and Root, it exposes the underlying fraud that leads back to Sterling and ultimately to him." As if on cue, Chloe snatched her phone from her purse. Her face went white as she read her screen. Her hand trembled, nearly dropping the device again. "What is it?" I demanded, pressing the advantage. She looked up, her eyes wide, filled with a terror that mirrored my own from a year ago. He just texted me. He's pulling his primary guarantee. He says he won't be liable for Chloe's inevitable default, and he's instructing the bank to freeze all his assets pending a full review of his own exposure. I smiled, a genuine cold smile. Mark had chosen his side. He chose self-preservation over revenge on me. "He just saved my house, Chloe," I said softly. "Because if Mark pulls his primary guarantee, your loan agreement, the one requiring both his primary guarantee and my secondary guarantee, becomes instantly invalid. The bank will reject the entire structure immediately, long before the statute of limitations runs out. Chloe let out a small, strangled sound. No, he can't. He'll lose everything. Exactly. He just saved himself from Sterling, but he just destroyed you and your leverage over the annuity. You have nothing to hold over me now, Chloe. And if you think Mark is going to hand over my grandmother's money willingly now that he's abandoned his plan to ruin me alongside you, I stepped back, knowing I had won the crucial battle, forcing the collapse of the loan structure before the deadline. You have about 24 hours before the bank notifies everyone of the voided agreement, Chloe. You have one final move left to save yourself from litigation by Sterling and the inevitable fraud charges. You can release the annuity now, or you can wait until I file my affidavit accusing you of notary fraud and collusion with Sterling and Associates. Chloe's composure shattered. She opened her mouth not to argue but to scream. Just then, a black, unmarked sedan screeched to a halt directly in front of the boutique, blocking the exit. Two men in dark suits, devoid of any identifiable logos, spilled out of the vehicle with alarming speed. They weren't the police. They moved with the practiced efficiency of corporate enforcers. One of them walked directly to Chloe, ignoring me completely, and slapped a formal-looking document onto the hood of her car. "Chloe Reynolds?" the man asked, his voice monotone, utterly without emotion. "You are hereby served with an immediate cease and desist order and seizure notice by Sterling and Associates, based on the documented material misrepresentation of ownership regarding Visionary Pathfinders, LLC, and the documented transfer of liabilities to our holding company. We are taking immediate possession of all physical and digital assets located at this premises." Chloe looked from the men to me, then back to the document on her car hood, trapped between my impending legal action and the corporate wolves Mark had unleashed. She opened her mouth to protest, but the second man simply reached into the boutique's open doorway and yanked a framed certificate off the wall. "What is this?" he barked, reading the document. "Wait a minute. This isn't a loan guarantee. This is a trust agreement, dated 3 weeks ago." He looked up, his eyes settling on Chloe with cold fury. "Why is Mark Vance's primary residence title, which was supposed to be transferred to us upon loan default, listed as the collateral for this trust? And why is the beneficiary listed as Mark Vance?" Chloe visibly deflated, looking utterly defeated, as if someone had just yanked the floor out from under her. "It was a contingency," she stammered. "A backup, in case Sterling pulled out." The corporate enforcer slowly turned his head, his eyes finally flicking toward me, assessing the situation with terrifying speed. "And who are you, ma'am? Are you the beneficiary of this contingency trust?" I stood between Chloe and the men from Sterling, the sunlight catching the grim satisfaction in my expression. "I'm Alara Vance, and I have the original Appendix D that proves Mark was planning his escape, regardless of who defaulted. But I suspect the new trust agreement supersedes the old one, doesn't it?" The enforcer ignored Chloe entirely and looked back at me, a flicker of respect in his severe eyes. "If you are named beneficiary on that trust, Ms. Vance, then as of this moment, Mark Vance's primary residence is legally transferred out of the control of the defaulting loan entities and into your ownership, effective immediately. Congratulations on your aggressive maneuvering." Chloe let out a choked sob, staring at the spot where her successful business had been moments before. Mark hadn't just saved himself. He had used his final move against the takeover to ensure that the only asset he truly cared about, his primary residence, was gifted to me, bypassing both Chloe and Sterling and Associates entirely. I had my house back, but I still didn't have the annuity, and as the enforcers began methodically taping up the doors of the Willow and Root, I realized the only person who knew the true location and status of that annuity was Chloe. The woman now staring at me, utterly ruined, standing amidst the debris of Mark's final, convoluted betrayal. "Where is it, Chloe?" I asked, stepping toward her. "Where is Appendix D's annuity? Mark risked everything to protect it from Sterling, but he didn't get it back. You were supposed to deliver it to him." Chloe looked past me toward the retreating black sedan. Then she looked back at me, a terrifying wild light in her eyes. "You think you won, Ilara," she spat, wiping a tear away with the back of her hand. "The annuity is safe, but it's not in a bank account. It was never about money for Mark. It was about leverage. And you know who has the final keys to that leverage now?" She let the question hang in the salty air, a fresh, sickening wave of dread washing over me. "It's with the one person Mark trusted more than either of us, Ilara. The only person he knew would never betray him, not even in the final hours of his corporate execution." She gave a hollow, chilling laugh. "It's with the only person who was never on either side of this fight." "Who?" I demanded, stepping forward, gripping her arm. "Who is it, Chloe?" Chloe leaned in close, her breath smelling faintly of stale espresso and defeat. "It's with Dr. Davies, Ilara, the man you were supposedly researching for. He was Mark's silent partner in the entire takeover scheme from the start, and he's the one who currently holds the power of attorney over the annuity under the terms of Mark's first will, the one he never told you about." The name Dr. Davies hit me with the force of an unforeseen tidal wave. Kyoto, sabbatical, obscure texts on medieval trade routes, every piece of the tapestry of deceit snapped into place, revealing a horrifying masterpiece of long-term conspiracy. Mark hadn't been scrambling to save himself from Sterling. He had been orchestrating a controlled demolition, using me, Chloe, and even his trusted academic mentor as pawns to achieve a single, crucial objective: securing the annuity through a third party who was above suspicion. "Dr. Davies," I managed, releasing Chloe's arm as if she were suddenly toxic. "The quiet researcher." "He wasn't researching trade routes, Ilara," Chloe whispered, her voice flat, utterly defeated. "He was Mark's emergency exit. Mark signed the power of attorney over the annuity to Davies months ago, making him the sole executor upon any declaration of Mark's financial incapacitation, which the loan default was designed to trigger." The pieces spun wildly. Mark used the fraudulent loan rider, signed in July, to tie my house as collateral. He used the October signing, facilitated by Chloe, to ensure the loan would default on time. He used the Sterling takeover as the mechanism to seize his own firm's assets for himself, bypassing his creditors. And finally, he used the imminent default as the official incapacitation trigger to hand over the annuity to Davies, effectively cutting both me and Chloe out of the final prize. "But why?" I pleaded, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. "If he was going to walk away clean with the annuity, why let Sterling take his firm? Why let me keep the house?" Chloe gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "Because Sterling was the distraction. They thought they were taking over a failing architectural firm. They weren't. Mark structured the debt so that when Sterling acquired his firm, they also acquired the liability of the defaulted loan, the $500,000 that Chloe was supposed to be responsible for." She pointed a trembling finger toward the seized boutique. "Sterling took the debt. Mark walked away from the wreckage clean, and Davies holds the annuity, the real prize, until the dust settles. Mark figured if he had to lose his business, he'd make sure his rivals bought the debt, and you, Alara, would at least have a home. It was a monstrous, complex act of self-preservation wrapped in layers of revenge and calculated sacrifice. He'd destroyed his career to ensure his enemies bought his failures, and he'd left me with a house as a bizarre final olive branch, while simultaneously ensuring I lost the one asset he knew
on the bill
I valued above
not the
all
legal
else, fallout between Mark and Davies. I looked at
This
the
was my
corporate
final
men still
chance to
processing the
intervene
paperwork
before
the annuity
They were
vanished
focused on-
into the academic ether. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady now. I didn't call Mr. Henderson. I bypassed the legal channels that Mark had so meticulously designed around. I went to the one place Dr. Davies was guaranteed to be, the university server. I logged into the university's secure portal using the old administrative access codes Henderson had given me years ago when I briefly consulted on faculty publications. I bypassed two-factor authentication using a known backdoor vulnerability in the system that Mark and I had discovered together when auditing the department's obsolete database. Davies' administrative profile flashed on the screen. His faculty travel was listed, Kyoto, approved through the end of the month. His email was set to forward all incoming correspondence to a single, encrypted backup server managed by his private foundation. I didn't email him. I didn't call him. I located the specific server IP address for the foundation's private exchange, an address I recognized instantly from the metadata of Mark's initial divorce planning documents. Mark had always kept a digital contingency for his most sensitive dealings with Davies, and I now had the key. Using a remote access tool Henderson had installed on my laptop years ago for emergencies, I forced a connection, bypassing the firewall and injecting a single, devastating piece of data directly into the Foundation's primary directory. It wasn't a threat or a demand, it was a notification. I uploaded the full, untainted copy of the original, July-signed divorce decree, the one that didn't contain the hidden rider, and attached a single scan page from the Sterling and Associates takeover agreement, the one proving Mark had knowingly structured the loan to trigger default against his own assets. Then I sent a short anonymous email to the head of the university's board of governors, a woman notoriously ruthless about academic integrity, with the subject line, "Urgent. Professor Davies compromised in high-level corporate fraud and asset concealment." I didn't need the annuity back immediately. I needed Davies compromised now. If his academic standing was threatened by association with Mark's corporate schemes, his priority would shift instantly from protecting Mark's hidden assets to protecting his own reputation and tenure. I closed my laptop, the entire operation taking less than 5 minutes. I looked at Chloe, who was now being questioned by the grim-faced Sterling agents. "The annuity is gone, Chloe," I said quietly. "Mark set this up to protect it from everyone, even you. But he made one massive oversight. He trusted a scholar to hold his secrets, and scholars value their tenure more than anything else." Just as I turned to leave the chaos behind, my phone buzzed with a new unlisted number. It was Mark. My heart hammered, expecting the final vitriolic curse. The message was short, devoid of any emotion, almost professional. "The house is yours, clean of all debt and encumbrances, effective immediately. Sterling's lawyers are finalizing the release forms now. Davies will be in contact. Do not interfere with the annuity transfer. It is the only thing keeping me out of federal prison." I stood there, leaning against my newly reclaimed car, the afternoon breeze carrying the distant sound of sirens approaching the boutique. I had lost the annuity, the sentimental treasure I believed would secure my future, but I had won everything else. I had my home, my reputation, and I had ensured that the two people who had spent a year dismantling my life were now facing separate, overwhelming enemies. Chloe facing corporate seizure, and Mark facing the ruin of his professional life, all because he underestimated my desperation and overestimated the loyalty of his own silent partner. I got into my car, the familiar scent of my own stale coffee grounds suddenly smelling like victory. I drove away, not looking back at the wreckage. The story of Alara Vance was no longer about what she had lost. It was about the architect who finally found himself trapped in the blueprint of his own design.